This is CNBC Explains. Viagra, Botox, Mounjaro. These drugs have taken the world by storm, and they're all manufactured in the same place, Ireland. In little more than half a century, Ireland has scaled from an industrial newcomer to a global powerhouse, now the world's third largest exporter of pharmaceutical products.
The pharmaceutical industry has really had a massive impact on the Irish economy. It has attracted a lot of big multinational pharmaceutical companies, and it's visible really all over Ireland.
Between 1958 and 2010, the country welcomed more than 50 new pharmaceutical manufacturing facilities. Industry pioneers such as Pfizer, Bristol-Myers Squibb and Rowa Pharmaceuticals led the way, paving the way for Ireland to become home to 9 of the world's top 10 pharmaceutical companies. But this growth has been a double-edged sword. While Ireland has reaped the benefits of high-value employment and huge tax receipts, the pharma industry's sheer scale has skewed the nation's headline GDP. In fact, Irish GDP is so heavily inflated by multinationals that the government now uses Modified Gross National Income, or GNI, as a more accurate pulse of the domestic economy. But even by this more grounded metric, the sector's dominance is staggering. In 2019, pharmaceutical exports accounted for roughly a quarter of Ireland's GNI. Just 6 years later, that figure climbed to more than 40%, highlighting a deepening economic dependence on a single industry.
Our growth has been driven largely by foreign direct investment. The risk then for us is whether foreign direct investment will continue to flow into Ireland at the rate that it has over the last 50 years.
So how did Ireland's economy become so dependent on big pharma? And what risks lie ahead?
Before the 60s, Ireland's whole economy was quite protectionist. It had very high tariffs, sometimes up to 50% for some imports, and it was a lot of focus on import substitution, which led Irish industries to not be very competitive.
At the time, Ireland was a very grim place with very high unemployment and massive outward migration.
The way that Ireland had approached trade wasn't really working for the Irish economy, and something needed to change.
One early turning point came in 1956, when Ireland introduced Export Profits Tax Relief, or EPTR. It offered up to 100% tax exemption on profits from exported goods, attracting manufacturers to set up in the country. At the same time, Ireland began dismantling tariffs and expanding the role of its investment agency, the Industrial Development Authority, or IDA, sparking a wave of foreign investment.
The pharmaceutical industry was a natural focus for the IDA from the start. Pharmaceutical products, especially the branded drugs, are high-value products, and they have high value-to-volume ratios, which means that they are less sensitive to transportation costs. There was also a growing demand for medicines around the world at this time, as national health systems wanted to buy more medicines. And as soon as one actor, one company established themselves in Ireland, that had a snowball effect.
In its quest for foreign investment, the IDA focused heavily on US and UK corporations. Beyond tax incentives, Ireland positioned itself as a gateway to Europe, an English-speaking base inside the European market. American company Bristol-Myers Squibb was one of the first movers and became a showcase example used by the IDA to attract more investors. In 2017, the firm sold one of its manufacturing facilities to SK Biotech, part of South Korea's SK Group.
This manufacturing site has actually been here since 1964. We are a contract development and manufacturing organisation, so we don't own the IP, the intellectual property of any of those products. That all belongs to our customers. We're specialised in small molecule APIs, so active pharmaceutical ingredient. The APIs we manufacture are for a range of diabetes, cardiovascular, and we have a large range also and history of manufacture of anti-cancer products.
Taking advantage of its position, Ireland was able to build a supply chain serving international markets. In the process, manufacturers had to meet strict regulatory standards, including approvals from agencies like the US Food and Drug Administration and the European Medicines Agency. And as exports rose, so did the footprint of the pharmaceutical industry in the country.
It has attracted a lot of big multinational pharmaceutical companies, and it's visible really all over Ireland, but there are regional hubs like County Cork and Dublin where the ecosystem around the pharmaceutical industry is really well built out.
What you got were self-supporting clusters of these firms. So in different parts of the country, you have medical device companies or computer companies or high-tech companies or pharmaceutical companies.
According to the Central Statistics Office, Ireland's pharmaceutical sector employed 75,000 workers in basic pharma products and preparations in 2025, a 15% rise since 2023.
The industry also creates a lot of jobs, both at these manufacturing plants, at research and development centers, but there's also a whole set of other sectors that supply the pharmaceutical sector.
Multinationals brought physical capital with them, new plant and equipment. They brought advanced technology. And around those businesses then clusters formed. And we have seen, for example, people who had worked for the multinationals leave, set up their own small businesses.
Another draw for pharmaceutical companies in Ireland was its highly educated workforce.
Ireland also focused a lot on transforming its educational system. This included opening up new community colleges, even new universities. They raised the school leaving age to 15. They focused more on technologies overall in their education rather than more traditional education systems.
Access to a talented workforce is critical for any business. Making pharmaceuticals is not an easy thing, and you really want the right people with the right expertise.
In the 1980s, the Irish government introduced a 10% preferential tax rate for manufacturing, later extending it to financial services. It's also around this time that companies like Apple began using tax structures that would later be known as the Double Irish. Under this arrangement, multinationals could set up two companies, one based in Ireland, handling manufacturing and sales, and another holding valuable intellectual property, often managed from a low-tax jurisdiction. The Irish operating company would then pay large royalties to the IP entity, reducing its taxable profits in Ireland and allowing companies to significantly lower their overall tax bills. Over time, Ireland moved away from EPTR and toward a standard corporate tax rate of 12.5%.
That is largely because they're trying to comply with EU rules and not being seen as a tax haven by other countries.
Despite that, Ireland remained attractive for tax planning. In the 2000s and early 2010s, companies used corporate inversions, merging with smaller Irish companies to relocate their headquarters to Ireland, where corporate taxes were still lower than in the US and other major economies, helping reduce their global tax bills. And when Ireland phased out the Double Irish in 2015 for new entrants, that triggered a massive intellectual property transfer. Companies like Allergan, Pfizer, and Eli Lilly moved valuable IP into Ireland, benefiting from generous tax deductions on patents, trademarks, and other intangible assets.
This IP transfer led to what is called leprechaun economics. And that's a term that was coined by the economist Paul Krugman to describe a very high and artificial rise in Irish GDP in 2015, when the GDP rose by 26%.
Between 2014 and 2021, the value of intangible assets in Ireland surged from around $386 billion to nearly $1 trillion. Over a similar period, Ireland's corporate tax receipts more than quadrupled, from €6.9 billion in 2015 to €32.9 billion in 2025.
Ireland is quite dependent on the pharmaceutical industry. Last year, in 2025, over 50% of the country's total exports were medicines and pharmaceutical products.
It's very significant for the government tax revenues because the people who work in the industry tend to be highly skilled and well paid, so they pay a lot of income tax. And then the companies themselves are highly profitable, so they pay a lot of corporation tax.
One of the potential challenges for Ireland is, like pharmaceutical companies, they need to navigate the so-called patent cliff. Every 10 years or so, there's some big blockbuster drug that loses its exclusivity rights, which means that it faces generic competition by others. And that typically results in a quite sharp drop in revenue for the original manufacturer. And for Ireland, it actually shows up in the national accounts. And in 2013, which was the time of the last patent cliff, GDP actually dropped quite significantly in one of those years.
In 2026, the Irish Fiscal Advisory Council warned about Ireland's reliance on tax receipts from just 3 multinational companies, 2 in tech and 1 in pharmaceuticals. In 2024, those firms accounted for around 46% of Ireland's corporation tax revenue.
This beautiful island of 5 million people has got the entire U.S. pharmaceutical industry.
Foreign direct investment has been the engine of growth for the Irish economy essentially since the 1950s and 1960s for more than 50 years. Most of it comes from the United States. There's a very different global environment now, and one that may not be so conducive to global capital flows.
The Irish government actually warned that as much as 75,000 jobs could be lost if the US implemented tariffs on the pharmaceutical industry.
It may be that over coming decades, we see a slowing of foreign direct investment, given what's going on in the geopolitics of the world. And in that case, Ireland will rely more on homegrown businesses to create jobs and to create growth.
We're in active negotiations and discussions with customers around a regionalisation strategy. It's really indicative of having a strategy to the uncertainty. The tariff in itself is indicative of uncertainty. So companies are really starting to say, okay, well, how can we regionalise our supply chain?
Despite calls for supply chain reshoring, major pharma companies continue to invest in Ireland.
Ireland is still attractive today for pharmaceutical companies. We can see that companies are still investing in Ireland. Novo Nordisk just earlier 2026 said that they would expand in Ireland.
For now, as you know, we are making the pill in US for US market, and it's the only actually right now end-to-end GLP-1 product that is made in US. The Irish expansion is focusing on the international organization, so we're able to also replicate what we have done in US for the rest of the world.
So when the GLP-1 weight loss drugs hit the market a few years ago, Novo Nordisk, they were actually not able to meet the demand for these drugs. And that really hit Novo Nordisk quite hard because it allowed a whole other sector called the compounding pharmaceutical sector to start producing cheaper copycat versions of Novo Nordisk's best-selling drug Ozempic and Wegovy, just because these drugs were in shortage. So it really shows how important it is for pharmaceutical companies to meet demand for their products.
Many times now we have to attract in from outside Ireland as well. Certainly one challenge for the industry here in Ireland is continuing to have that workforce available to us.
The competition globally for talent and skill is intensifying. Policymakers around the world are making moves to try to attract talent in science and in technology and in business development. There are some Indigenous Irish businesses that these are world-beating companies, but we just don't have enough of them, and you need a pipeline of them. So the key, I think, for Ireland would be to have a world-class entrepreneurial ecosystem and startups that scale quickly.